Your father left you the money, but I was left the manor. And the only thing waiting inside that vault is the truth about why your ruthless brother just tried to have you executed. The mahogany scent of the lawyer's office was suffocating, thick with old money and the stale air of finality. Outside the tall arched windows, the city hummed, oblivious to the small, tragic drama unfolding in this hushed room. I sat stiffly on the edge of a velvet chair, feeling like an imposter. My siblings, Marcus, Clara, and little Phoebe, were arrayed around the enormous antique desk, radiating a false, strained grief that barely masked their true anticipation. Dad had been gone 6 months, a sudden, brutal heart attack while pruning his prize-winning roses. He was a titan of industry, a man whose shadow stretched across half the state, and his will reading was less a legal formality and more a coronation ceremony for the survivors. We are all present today to honor the final wishes of the late Mr. Arthur Vance. Mr. Henderson, the family solicitor, began, his voice a dry rasp that barely disturbed the silence. He adjusted his spectacles, looking over the thick sheaf of parchment as if it contained the secrets of the universe rather than just Dad's estate division. Marcus, the eldest and the designated successor to the Vance Corporation, leaned forward, his custom-tailored suit jacket straining slightly across his broad shoulders. He had the ambition and the ruthlessness Dad always admired. Clara, the meticulous middle child, sat beside him, fiddling with the diamond tennis bracelet Dad had given her for her 30th birthday, a nervous habit that always signaled her calculating mind at work. Phoebe, perpetually the baby, just looked pale and small, clutching a tissue. I, on the other hand, was the anomaly, the black sheep, the disappointment. I hadn't spoken to Dad in earnest for nearly a decade, not since I dropped out of Wharton to open that ridiculous, struggling artisan coffee shop downtown. They all assumed I was here purely out of obligation, perhaps hoping for a small token stipend to keep my failing venture afloat. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. To his beloved wife, Eleanor, the primary residence, liquid assets totaling $50 million, and all personal jewelry, excepting that which is specifically bequeathed. A murmur of approval from Clara. $50 million was respectable, though hardly the lion's share. To Marcus Vance as the future CEO of Vance Corp., the controlling interest in the corporation, including all voting shares and the executive suite downtown. Marcus actually permitted himself a thin, satisfied smirk. That was the big prize. That was the throne. To Clara Vance, for her unwavering dedication to the family's financial stability, the entire portfolio of international real estate holdings valued conservatively at $200 million, and the summer villa in Tuscany. Clara gasped softly, a genuine moment of surprise breaking through her composure. She'd outmaneuvered us all on the property front. Phoebe received a significant trust fund, accessible upon her 25th birthday, ensuring her future comfort. Standard stuff. Then came the moment everyone, especially me, braced for. Mr. Henderson paused, taking a slow sip of water. I braced myself for the predictable, condescending footnote that would leave me with a token sum, maybe enough to buy Dad a very nice, very expensive bottle of scotch to pour over my head. And finally, Mr. Henderson continued, his gaze flicking toward me with what I perceived as a touch of pity, to Thomas Vance, for reasons only the deceased fully understood. He riffled the pages quickly, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. I watched Marcus lean in, expecting the slap in the face. Mr. Henderson didn't read the summary line. He skipped it. Instead, he moved directly to a section marked Exhibit C. Mr. Thomas Vance is bequeathed the entirety of the property known as Blackwood Manor, located in the remote foothills of the Catskills, along with all associated land deeds and structures currently listed under the holding company Solstice Investments. Silence descended again, thicker this time, laced with confusion. Blackwood Manor? None of us had even known Dad owned a place in the Catskills. Marcus frowned, pulling out his phone discreetly. "Sir," Marcus interjected, his voice tight with irritation. With respect, Dad sold off most of the remote properties years ago. Solstice Investments was dissolved when Dad restructured the energy sector. Are you certain this isn't an error? Mr. Henderson gave Marcus a look that instantly quieted him. "Mr. Marcus, the documents are meticulously prepared and witnessed by 3 separate legal professionals. This bequest is not an error. Furthermore, Exhibit C contains an addendum regarding the transfer of assets associated with Solstice Investments." He looked directly at me, a strange, almost conspiratorial glint in his eye. "Mr. Thomas, the bequest to you also includes complete, unencumbered ownership of a portfolio of bearer bonds held in an undisclosed Swiss account, valued this morning at $420 million. Furthermore, the deed to Blackwood Manor comes with the stipulation that all existing personnel, staff, groundskeepers, security, are to remain under your direct command, and that you are to report immediately to the property's estate manager, a Mr. Silas Thorne, upon taking possession." The air rushed out of the room. Marcus didn't just look angry, he looked betrayed. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her polished facade cracking entirely. Phoebe actually gasped out loud. $420 million? Marcus finally managed, his voice strained past the edge of civility. "That's more liquid wealth than all of us combined. Why? Why would he give the failure the majority share?" Mr. Henderson simply closed the file. Mr. Arthur Vance's final written instructions regarding this allocation are sealed for 24 hours. After that time, Mr. Thomas will receive the access codes and instructions from Mr. Thorne. You are all dismissed. As we stumbled out into the bright afternoon, Marcus grabbed my arm so hard I nearly dropped my worn messenger bag. "You better have a damn good explanation for this, Thomas, or so help me, I will dismantle every single piece of that pathetic little coffee shop you run." I managed to pull away, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear of Marcus, but from a sudden, dizzying realization. Dad hadn't left me money out of pity or a final act of appeasement. He'd left me the biggest share, the secret cash, and a remote manor with staff waiting. It felt like a mission. I drove straight out of the city, the GPS navigating me toward the Catskills, the landscape growing wilder, the cell service dying with every mile. Blackwood Manor didn't show up on any public registry. It felt like driving off the edge of the map. When I finally pulled up the long, winding gravel drive, it wasn't the quaint country home I expected. It was a monstrous Gothic structure, all dark stone and ivy, looming against the gathering twilight. The iron gates, rusted but still imposing, swung open silently as my car approached, as if they'd been waiting. Standing at the massive oak front door, silhouetted against the faintly lit entryway, was a man. Tall, rail-thin, dressed impeccably in a black suit that looked too formal for the wilderness. He stared at me with eyes that seemed far too intelligent for a mere groundskeeper. He stepped forward as I killed the engine. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice low and utterly devoid of warmth. "I am Silas Thorne. Your father left very specific instructions for your arrival. Before we discuss the assets, or the staff, or the property itself, there is something you must see immediately." He gestured not toward the house, but toward a massive, unmarked steel door set into the stone foundation beside the porch. He insisted you view this before sunrise. He called it the inheritance. Silas Thorne's demeanor was chillingly professional, a stark contrast to the decaying grandeur of Blackwood Manor. He didn't offer greetings, condolences, or even a flashlight. He simply stated his directive and waited, his posture rigid, as if carved from the same cold granite as the house behind him. I looked from the imposing, dark facade of the mansion, which seemed to breathe with secrets, to the heavy, welded steel door. It looked more like a bank vault than a cellar entrance. "The inheritance," I echoed, my voice sounding weak in the vast silence of the woods. "What is this, Silas? Dad never mentioned anything about a bunker or a vault. I thought he just liked collecting antique woodworking tools." Thorne allowed himself the slightest, almost painful twitch of his lip, which I took as a negative response. "Mr. Arthur Vance was a man of many interests, Mr. Thomas. Some were visible to the public, others were structurally necessary. This section of Blackwood Manor was built specifically for concealment. Access is keyed only to your genetic signature and a spoken passphrase." He stepped aside, revealing a discreet keypad next to the steel door, covered by a simple hinged metal plate. "Your father prepared a coded message for you, to be read immediately after his will was settled. It explains why you received the primary assets and why Marcus and Clara received the less volatile parts of the estate." My stomach tightened. This wasn't about stocks or real estate. This was darker. Dad had always been manipulative, but this felt orchestrated on a global scale. Why would he leave me the literal keys to something so clandestine? Thorne produced a small antique silver key, strangely ornate, and inserted it into a minuscule lock hidden beneath the keypad. A soft click echoed, and the cover sprang open, revealing a digital screen and a microphone. "Please speak the phrase, Mr. Thomas," Thorne urged, his eyes fixed intently on the door. I racked my brain trying to recall any inside joke, any obscure reference Dad might have used. My mind flashed back to my college years, the one time I'd truly impressed him with my grasp of obscure history, a late-night debate about Machiavelli. I leaned in, feeling ridiculous but compelled. "The serpent knows its own garden," I whispered, the words tasting foreign on my tongue. The keypad flashed emerald green. A low, mechanical whirring started deep within the stone, the sound of heavy bolts retracting. The massive steel door shuddered, then slowly, agonizingly, began to grind inward, revealing not a dusty cellar, but a sterile, brightly lit hallway extending into absolute darkness. The air that rushed out was chilled, dry, and carried a faint, metallic odor, like ozone and old copper. "Welcome to the inheritance, Mr. Thomas," Thorne said, his voice now barely audible over the mechanical groan. "The bonds are merely collateral. This is what your father truly protected." He handed me a heavy black plastic access card attached to a lanyard. "You are the sole authorized user. I will manage the external staff and the manor's upkeep. Your first duty is to secure this facility for the next 72 hours. Do not leave until you have reviewed everything inside and established a primary communication channel with me." "Wait, 72 hours?" I protested, clutching the card. "What exactly am I securing against? And what do Marcus and Clara know about this?" "They know nothing," Thorne stated flatly. They believe they inherited the empire. They are currently distracted by the stock market adjustments triggered by your father's passing. Adjustments that, I should mention, favor Vance Corp's primary competitors unless immediately counteracted. He paused, letting that sink in. As for what you are securing against, you are securing against those who believed Arthur Vance had retired his liabilities. They will discover your identity as the sole beneficiary quickly, especially Marcus. He's already digging. Thorne stepped back from the threshold, making a broad gesture toward the illuminated hallway. Inside, you will find operational schematics, encrypted data files, and the answers to why your father considered you the only trustworthy heir. Take the card, Mr. Thomas. Go inside. Time is already against you. Hesitantly, I stepped over the threshold. The air inside was unnervingly pressurized. As soon as my foot crossed the line, the steel door began to slide shut behind me with terrifying speed. I scrambled forward, heart pounding, and managed to jam the black access card into a reader slot just as the door was about to seal completely. The massive barrier stopped inches from closing with a deafening thud. I was trapped in a narrow, glowing passage leading into the unknown depths of the manor's foundation. "Silas, wait, I need to know what I'm walking into," I shouted back toward the sliver of exterior light, but Thorne was already gone, retreating into the shadows of the manor entrance. I turned, the silence of the subterranean passage swallowing my frantic breathing. Before me, the light ended abruptly, meeting a wall of solid, reinforced titanium. But on this titanium surface, a single large screen was active. It wasn't displaying schematics or files. It was displaying a live video feed. And the feed was focused directly on my brother, Marcus, who was currently standing on the main street of our hometown, shouting into a cell phone with a look of absolute murderous rage, surrounded by two large, silent men in identical dark suits who were clearly not local police. Marcus was pointing directly toward the distant hills, toward Blackwood Manor. Then the screen flickered, and a text overlay appeared beneath Marcus's enraged image. "Alert! Immediate hostile reconnaissance detected." The image of Marcus, his face contorted with raw fury as he pointed in my general direction, was the confirmation I didn't want. He wasn't mourning. He was hunting. And the appearance of those two silent, imposing figures flanking him confirmed that this wasn't just family squabble, it was professional. I slammed my hand against the titanium wall beside the screen, the vibration echoing painfully in the small space. "Silas!" I yelled again, twisting back toward the entrance, but the faint sliver of twilight visible through the gap in the steel door was already closing. With a final, sickening hydraulic sigh, the massive vault sealed itself completely, plunging the corridor into darkness save for the harsh, white emergency lighting flickering on above my head. I was alone, trapped between a brother who believed I'd stolen his birthright and whatever sinister legacy Dad had left me buried beneath the Catskills. I looked back at the screen. Marcus was gone from the live feed, replaced by a rotating set of surveillance images showing the main gate, the perimeter of the property, and then, alarmingly, the live feed from inside the main house, where Clara and Phoebe were still residing, apparently unaware they were now surrounded. I frantically scanned the interface for a way to contact Silas, finding only the black access card slot. Desperate, I jammed the card in again. This time, the screen flashed, and a new set of instructions appeared, overlaid onto the Marcus feed. Access granted. Phase 1 initiation. Objective: Secure Asset Vault Doubles 01. Immediate. Warning: all perimeter defenses are now active. External communication is restricted to authorized channels only. Asset Vault 001? I muttered, glancing down the dimly lit corridor that stretched away from the titanium door. It looked impossibly long, a true underground labyrinth. Suddenly, a small compartment slid open beneath the main screen. Inside rested a single item, a vintage heavy-duty pistol, well-oiled and loaded, nestled beside a small leather-bound notebook. The notebook. That had to be Dad's. I snatched the gun first, the cold weight surprisingly comforting in my hand, then grabbed the journal. The leather was supple, worn from handling. I flipped it open to the first page, where Dad's familiar, decisive handwriting filled the space. To Thomas, if you are reading this, you are the only one capable of understanding the true nature of the Vance legacy. Marcus has the corporation. He can manage the illusion. But the true power and the true danger lies down here. The bonds were bait for the vultures. This place is the anchor. The inheritance is not wealth, Thomas. It is responsibility. The Vance family did not just build railroads and banks. We built the safety net. We are the unseen guardians against threats the world doesn't know exist. I flipped the page, adrenaline surging, realizing this explained everything. The secrecy, the sudden elevation, the coded language. The structure you are in is designed to withstand military assault. Your first priority is Vault 001. It contains the operational keys to the remaining global assets, which are far more critical than any stock certificate. You must reach it before external parties breach the perimeter. I heard it then. A faint, distant sound carried through the thick stone structure. A low, rhythmic thudding, growing steadily louder. It was the sound of heavy machinery impacting Earth, or perhaps a sustained detonation. They weren't just scouting. They were tunneling in. I looked at the map displayed on the screen now. The path to Vault 001 was marked by a pulsing blue line, weaving through at least 3 subterranean levels. It was a significant trek. Just as I started to move toward the passage, the emergency lights overhead sputtered and died, plunging the corridor into absolute blackness. My heart leaped into my throat. I instinctively raised the pistol, pointing it uselessly into the void. Then a new light source appeared, not from the ceiling, but from the far end of the corridor, down where the blue line on the map indicated the entrance to the next level. It was a harsh, white beam, sweeping rapidly back and forth like a tactical flashlight being used by someone searching with extreme prejudice. And this time, I heard voices. Low, professional commands in a language that wasn't English, clipped and urgent. They are already inside, I thought, clutching the journal tighter. They bypassed the perimeter. I spun around, looking back toward the sealed steel door, praying for Silas to have left some secondary exit, some escape route for the man he'd just trapped. There was nothing, just cold, silent titanium. The flashlight beam swept closer, and I caught a glimpse of the first figure rounding a corner, tall, armored, and definitely not a disgruntled sibling. But before I could decide whether to hide or engage, the floor beneath my feet shuddered violently, not from an external impact, but from a catastrophic internal failure. A piercing, high-pitched alarm began to shriek from the access card reader I had just used, and the heavy titanium door I'd barely managed to keep from closing behind me suddenly ripped inward with impossible force, not sliding, but being torn off its hinges with a deafening screech of tortured metal. Framed in the sudden, blinding moonlight pouring in from the ruined entrance stood Marcus. He wasn't alone this time. He was flanked by the 2 imposing men from the town square, and behind them, Silas Thorne stood watching, a faint, almost regretful smile playing on his lips as he held a small remote device in his hand. Marcus looked past the wreckage directly at me, his eyes burning with manic triumph. "You fool, Thomas! You thought Dad would give the failure the keys? He left you the lock. I was supposed to wait for you to open it, but Silas here showed me the real fail-safe. You've been running my distraction for the last hour. Now step away from the door, or I'll have these gentlemen introduce you to the concept of rapid decompression." The sound of the titanium door being ripped from its moorings was the loudest noise I had ever heard. A violent expulsion of pressurized air and twisted metal that felt like a physical blow. The transition from the sterile, controlled darkness of the vault corridor to the sudden chaotic moonlight was jarring. Marcus stood framed in the massive opening, no longer looking like a grieving businessman, but a predator who had just cornered his prey. The two men behind him, thugs, mercenaries, whatever they were, wore tactical gear that looked far too expensive for a family dispute. They moved with an unnerving synchronicity, flanking Marcus and slowly advancing into the corridor. And Silas Thorne, the loyal steward, was now standing casually beside Marcus, holding a small, sleek remote control. His faint smile wasn't regretful. It was purely victorious. "Silas, you traitor!" I spat, leveling the heavy pistol I'd taken from the compartment directly at Marcus's chest. The weight of the weapon felt solid, real, a stark contrast to the sudden, dizzying unreality of the situation. Silas merely inclined his head toward Marcus. "Mr. Thomas, your father's instructions were explicit. Only the sole legitimate heir gains access to the facility. Marcus, however, provided the necessary leverage to accelerate the process. He understood that when a legacy is threatened, one must secure the assets before the paperwork is finalized, a trait Arthur Vance admired, albeit in a different son." Marcus laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the stone walls. "He admired ruthlessness, Thomas. You were always too busy serving lattes to appreciate that. I knew he'd keep something hidden here, a final insurance policy. But I didn't know the lock required your DNA, you useless leech. Good thing Silas here was patient enough to explain the finer points of genetic sequencing after the will reading, and how to trick the system into thinking you were entering voluntarily." My mind raced. The access card hadn't been keyed to me entering. It had been keyed to my presence being detected after the vault had been triggered. They had used me to open the door, ensuring they bypassed whatever internal security measures Dad had built to keep me out initially. "You used me as the override," I whispered, my grip tightening on the trigger. "Precisely," Marcus said, taking another step forward. The tactical men mirrored him, their movements economical and threatening. "Now, step away from the wall, Thomas. Drop the journal. This is where the real Vances take over." I looked down at the leather-bound book in my left hand, the operational keys, the answers, the truth. It was all within those pages. If I let go, it was over. They would secure the underground assets, and Marcus would simply erase me, probably making it look like I panicked and fell down a hole. The tension was a live wire snapping between us. The two men behind Marcus were now close enough that I could see the cold, bored intensity in their eyes. They weren't interested in the inheritance, they were interested in the assignment. "If you wanted the keys, Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "why didn't you just take them from Dad before he died?" Marcus hesitated, a flicker of genuine pain crossing his face before it was instantly smothered by rage. He wouldn't give them up. He kept saying I lacked integrity, said I valued the symbol more than the responsibility. He said I'd burn it all down for a headline. He nodded sharply to the mercenary on his left. Take him. Gently, if possible. I want him alive long enough to sign the transfer documents. The first man lunged, covering the distance between us with startling speed. I didn't think. I reacted. Years of dodging overly zealous customers in my coffee shop, years of quick reflexes honed by working a busy espresso machine, kicked in. I fired. The gunshot in the tight stone corridor was deafening, a physical shockwave. The bullet hit the lead mercenary dead center in his chest plate. He stumbled back with a choked gasp, his advanced armor absorbing the impact, but throwing him violently off balance. He collided heavily with the second operative, sending them both sprawling into the wreckage of the steel door. It bought me exactly 1 second. Instead of running further into the vault system, I turned toward the only other viable option, the main house where Clara and Phoebe were sleeping, completely unaware their brother had just orchestrated an armed intrusion. I sprinted past the downed men, ignoring Silas's sharp shout of, "Stop him!" and burst through the opening where the vault door used to be. I scrambled up the stone steps leading to the manor porch, the journal clutched tight. The front door of Blackwood Manor was unlocked, another prepared contingency. I burst into the foyer. It was vast, dark, and silent, smelling faintly of lemon polish and fear. "Clara! Phoebe!" I yelled, charging toward the main staircase. From the shadows at the top of the landing, 2 figures emerged, silhouetted against a flickering oil lamp. It wasn't Clara or Phoebe. It was 2 more heavily armed figures, identical to the ones Marcus had downstairs. They had clearly been positioned inside the manor, waiting for the breach. They raised their weapons instantly. Before I could even process the sight, before I could raise my pistol, a blinding flash erupted from the landing, followed by the distinct thwack of compressed air. The first operative staggered, clutching his head as a small black projectile embedded itself deep into his tactical helmet. He crumpled silently. Then, the second operative turned his rifle toward the source of the counterattack, a narrow, dusty library doorway on the ground floor, and fired a 3-round burst. The library door splintered violently. I dove behind a massive antique grandfather clock just as the second mercenary's muzzle flashes illuminated the foyer. From the splintered remains of the library, a woman's voice, sharp and surprisingly strong, cut through the ringing in my ears. "Daddy always said you were the smart one, Thomas, but you're too slow. Get to the second floor and find the master study. I've got these clowns busy for 30 seconds, tops." It wasn't Clara. It wasn't Phoebe. It was a woman I had never seen before, breathing heavily, reloading her weapon with practiced ease in the darkness of the shattered library. And as I looked up toward the second-floor landing, dodging the return fire from the remaining operative, I saw something else moving in the shadows near the staircase, a figure that was too tall, too slender to be human, observing the firefight with an unsettling, predatory stillness. The voice from the library was raw, laced with an authority that felt strangely familiar, yet utterly alien. "Daddy always said you were the smart one, Thomas." The shock of recognizing the sentiment, even if the speaker was a complete unknown, momentarily froze my decision-making process. I didn't wait for another warning. I scrambled backward, kicking the heavy pendulum of the grandfather clock for leverage, and dove toward the relative cover of a massive carved marble fireplace mantel. The second mercenary tracked my movement, unleashing another controlled burst. Marble chipped, showering sparks near my head. "Who the hell are you? Where are Clara and Phoebe?" I roared over the din, trying to maintain visual contact with the threat while simultaneously assessing the cryptic instruction. "Second floor, master study. Your father's other insurance policy." The voice snapped back from the library, punctuated by another sharp impact sound, the distinct thwack of another specialized projectile hitting armor. "They're safe, Thomas. They're with the staff. Just get to the study." The last mercenary attacking me suddenly stopped firing. He didn't collapse like the first. He simply lowered his weapon and looked toward the ruined entrance of the vault, where Marcus and Silas were beginning to emerge, brushing debris off their expensive clothing. "Boss, we have primary containment failure in Sector Gamma," the operative radioed, his voice tinny through his helmet speakers. "Breach confirmed. Unauthorized hostile engagement initiated within the residence." Marcus looked furious. "What are you talking about? Stop him! Get Thomas!" The mercenary slowly turned back to face Marcus and Silas. "Orders from HQ," he stated, his voice flat. "Asset recovery protocol switched to immediate neutralization of all unauthorized Vance bloodlines, including the CEO." A moment of profound, terrifying silence hung in the foyer. Marcus stared at his own hired muscle, realization dawning on his face like a fatal diagnosis. What orders? Before Marcus could finish, the mercenary raised his rifle, not at me, but at Silas Thorne. "Silas," the mercenary said, his voice betraying nothing. "The Vance corporate oversight structure has deemed Mr. Arthur Vance's contingency planning an unacceptable risk vector." Marcus was babbling, looking between the mercenary and Silas. "Silas, what is this? Who is HQ? Get them under control." Silas, however, hadn't flinched. He slowly raised the remote control he'd used to disable the vault door, but instead of aiming it at the mercenary, he pointed it toward the ceiling. "Marcus," Silas said, his voice suddenly weary, shedding the last vestiges of his professional facade. "Your father didn't just set up contingencies for external threats. He set up contingencies for you." Silas pressed a single unmarked button on the remote. A heavy metallic clang echoed from the rafters directly above Marcus and the mercenaries. Thick, high-tensile steel netting, disguised perfectly as decorative molding, slammed down with terrifying speed. It didn't just trap them. It encased them in a suffocating cage that descended rapidly toward the marble floor. Marcus screamed, clawing uselessly at the impossibly strong wires as the netting enveloped him, Silas and the two mercenaries. They were suspended barely 3 feet above the ground, immobilized. "This is the security system you inherited, Marcus," Silas said, sounding almost sad. "The system Arthur installed when he realized you were willing to betray the entire structure for a quarterly profit margin." The unknown woman from the library emerged, stepping over the threshold. She wasn't small. She was compact, muscular, and carried an incredibly specialized rifle that looked like something designed for space warfare. She walked with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was. She looked at me, gave a curt nod, and then looked at Silas, who was now trapped in the netting alongside Marcus. "Thorne," she addressed Silas, her voice crisp. "Asset Thomas is secured in the primary corridor. Primary threat neutralized. The unexpected arrival of your external cleanup crew complicated matters, but the primary containment cage functioned as designed." She walked over to the sealed vault entrance, examined the mangled steel, and shook her head in professional disapproval. "Amateurs." She turned to me, extending a hand, her face finally illuminated by the foyer's ambient light. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that mirrored my father's intensity. "I am Agent Lyra Vance, your father's last operational director and your newly assigned tactical liaison. Welcome to the real family business, Thomas." She didn't wait for me to shake her hand. She was already looking up the staircase toward the master study. We have about 90 seconds before the internal magnetic locks reset and this cage becomes permanent, Thomas. We need the master study keys from the desk. Marcus won't talk, but the location of the override protocol for the external asset recovery team is logged in his personal comms. Get moving. We have a world to keep stable. I finally dropped the pistol, the journal secure under my arm. The absurdity of the situation, trapping my brother in a super cage while a mysterious female operative rescued me from his hired help, was almost comical if it weren't for the sound of the locking mechanisms beginning to engage deep within the steel netting. I bolted for the staircase. The true inheritance finally revealed, not money but a secret war, and I was now officially on the front line with Agent Lyra Vance guiding my first terrifying steps into the dark legacy of Arthur Vance.